Greetings everyone. Today I have what I think may be the first review on the internet of the new Yongnuo 50mm f1.4 lens for Canon EF mount cameras. It covers Canon's full frame or APS-C digital SLR cameras, or you can mount it onto a mirrorless camera if you use an adapter. Yongnuo are famous for their budget lenses, and this very bright aperture autofocus lens can be found new over on eBay for as little as about £150 or $180 in the US. That's a pretty serious bargain. Canon's clunky old 50mm f1.4 EOS M lens is still £290 or $329 or so, nearly double the price. If this Yongnuo lens can achieve a similar build and optical quality, then it might be a no-brainer. I'll be comparing these two obvious competitors throughout the review. The copy of the lens you see here was bought new from one of their sellers on eBay, who communicated with me really well, and it took about 2 weeks from ordering to show up in my office. Now, some people and even some magazines have taken it upon themselves to label this the Mark II version of the lens, which is why I've put a little 2 in parentheses in the title of this video. That's because Yongnuo planned to release a 50mm f1.4 lens which looked very different to this new model, but as far as I know, that original version of their lens never made it to market for whatever reason, so officially this lens is not actually designated as a Mark II version, as you can see on the box. And everyone loves a 50mm f1.4 lens. On a full frame camera, 50mm gives you a nice standard field of view, neither wide angle nor telephoto. And on an APS-C camera, it's the full frame equivalent of 80mm, better for portrait and subject photography. And an aperture as wide as f1.4 lets in tons of light for shooting in dark situations and can also throw your background out of focus very nicely. f1.4 is 66% wider aperture than f1.8, so you'll see a nice bit of difference in your images between this and a cheaper f1.8 lens at their widest apertures. This particular lens is a bit bigger and heavier than some other 50mm f1.4 optics, including the old Canon version, probably because it has a more complex optical formula than some other 50mm lenses with 9 glass elements inside. It weighs over 500 grams, even though the lens body is mostly made of plastic. It does feel quite solid though. A classic characteristic of Yongnuo lenses is that they come with protective covers over the glass elements. Obviously, remove these before use. The lens mount is made of metal, but without any weather sealing gasket. The focus ring turns freely and smoothly when it's set to autofocus mode. If you switch it over to manual focus, then you'll find that the plastic focus ring has just a tiny bit of play in it when you change direction, which can be slightly annoying. When you turn it slowly, it's very precise actually, which is handy when you're shooting at f1.4. If you turn it faster though, you hear a slightly worrying grating sound. It turns the opposite way to Canon's own lenses, and the front of the lens does not rotate as you focus. Let's see about the autofocus motor then. First, the Yongnuo. Now, Canon's 50mm f1.4 lens. Well, both lenses make a little noise, but the Canon lens is a lot quieter and much faster. Some good news though is that the Yongnuo lens focused accurately on my test cameras. Here's an interesting feature. This is the first lens I've ever seen with a micro USB port built into its side for firmware updates. It's hidden away at the bottom. I wonder if this might catch on with other manufacturers. My computer recognized the lens when I plugged it in. However, I couldn't find any software for it on the official Yongnuo site as of yet, so perhaps that upgrade software is something that's coming soon. The lens's aperture mechanism has 7 slightly rounded iris blades, which will give you quite smooth out-of-focus backgrounds when your aperture is topped down. Overall, the lens is slightly bulky and the autofocus mechanism is hardly quick and quiet, but actually it generally works really well. Alright, let's look at image quality. My wife is currently away with our Canon 6D camera for a while, and I wanted to get this review out for all of you as soon as possible, so for my full frame camera tests, I'll be going straight to my 42 megapixel Sony A7R II, which is far higher resolution anyway. Let's see how the new Yongnuo lens compares with the older Canon 50mm f1.4. At f1.4, in the middle of the image, the cheaper Yongnuo lens easily beats the Canon lens in contrast. Resolution looks about the same, but the Canon lens also shows a lot more purple fringing. Over in the corners, the Yongnuo lens maintains its contrast advantage, but if you look closely, the Canon lens has a resolution advantage, it's a little bit sharper. Stop down to f2 and it's about the same story for both lenses over in the corners, but back in the middle, the Yongnuo lens maintains its slight contrast advantage. At f2.8, both lenses are about the same in the middle now, and here is the image quality when you look back in the corners. At f4, the Canon lens pulls ahead a little further with its sharpness advantage there. At f5.6, the Yongnuo improves a little, but the Canon is still slightly better, a touch sharper with less chromatic aberration. Here is f8, f11, f16, and f22, where diffraction is causing some new softness. So, interesting results. At wide apertures, the Yongnuo clearly beats the Canon in the middle of your images with its much better contrast. But the Canon lens shows sharper corners at all apertures with less chromatic aberration. Well, let's see how the lenses work on an APS-C camera now. They're adapted onto my 24 megapixel Canon EOS M3. At f1.4, on a 24 megapixel camera, both lenses enter into a slightly weird world of optical problems. The Yongnuo lens shows more contrast, but the Canon lens offers much more sharpness. The Yongnuo lens displays a lot of chromatic aberration, but the Canon lens shows monstrous purple fringing. Over in the corners, it's a very similar situation. Stop down to f2 and the corners on both lenses show little improvement, but image quality back in the middle is miles better for both of them. The Canon lens looks a little sharper to me here. Stop down to f2.8 and the lenses are equally good in the middle of the image now. Over in the corners, again, the Canon is clearly pulling ahead. Here are the results at f4, f5.6, f8, and f11. Overall, it's clear that the Canon lens pulls ahead more noticeably in my tests on APS-C. Let's see now about vignetting and distortion on a full-frame camera. Both the Canon and Yongnuo lens perform essentially the same here, quite noticeable barrel distortion and strong vignetting at f1.4. Stop down to f2 for brighter corners and f2.8 for quite even illumination. Let's see about close-up image quality. Both lenses are advertised as being able to shoot down to about 45 centimeters, but the Yongnuo lens can get just a tiny bit closer. At f1.4 on my Sony A7R II, the Canon lens is a touch sharper. Interestingly though, stop down to f2 and both lenses become decently sharp, but the Yongnuo is winning again on contrast. When it comes to working against bright lights, both lenses are absolutely diabolical. I think the Canon lens comes off very slightly worse here though. I had some extra time to test coma levels. At f1.4 on the Yongnuo lens, we see some wild coma smearing in the image corners on bright points of light. At f2, it's still pretty bad, but stop down to f2.8 and it's relatively under control. Finally, let's see about bokeh. Both lenses have different optical formulas, and the Yongnuo lens seems to give slightly softer backgrounds, in my opinion, with slightly less highlighting in bright points of light. The quality of the Yongnuo lens's bokeh is really quite smooth. Alright then, overall. Considering that we're dealing with a lens that costs £160, the Yongnuo 50mm f1.4 is impressive. It's not a fantastic lens on APS-C cameras, where the more expensive Canon alternative is sharper, but on full frame, its sharpness is very acceptable, its contrast very good, and its other optical characteristics are quite alright. Its autofocus is definitely a bit slow and noisy, but it works, and its bright aperture of f1.4 and quite smooth looking bokeh mean that it'll easily get you some stunning looking pictures. This is probably the best Yongnuo lens that I've tested so far. Bearing in mind its value for money, it comes recommended.